1991, the city of Oakland, California. 25 people die as a residential area is burned to the ground in America's worst ever wildfire. Over 3,000 homes are destroyed, causing $1.5 billion worth of damage. From California to Spain to the Australian bush, the dry regions of the world are under constant threat from wildfire. In these areas, once a decade, a blaze of catastrophic proportions ignites, causing enormous damage to property and sometimes fatalities. One of the century's most devastating wildfires took place in April 1983 on what became known as Ash Wednesday, when fires started throughout southeast Australia. The small town of Upper Beaconsfield in the state of Victoria was one of the worst hit. This is a recreation based on the testimony of those who survived. Howard Griffiths, his wife Sheila, and their 3 children left England in 1980 and moved to Australia. They settled in Upper Beaconsfield. The Griffiths quickly grew to love their new home. Set amidst the lush Australian bush in the hills north of Melbourne, Upper Beaconsfield offered an idyllic setting for their new beginning. They soon started to enjoy the Australian way of life, the barbecues, the swimming pool, the glorious sunshine. It could not have been more different to the life they'd left behind. The uncertainty they had felt arriving in a new country was soon forgotten. Their son Chris had just turned 20 and had begun working at the local bank. Jane, their eldest daughter, was 15, still in school and doing well. Karen, the baby of the family, also seemed to be settling in and making new friends. Howard was more convinced than ever that they'd made the right decision in coming to Australia. The Griffiths' house overlooked 40 acres of dense bush. They had been warned that after a prolonged period of warm weather, it could quickly become a major fire hazard, but they were new to Australia and its ways. They had never experienced a wildfire. The Griffiths could not have known of the dangers it held. On Ash Wednesday, they found out. As usual on a weekday, Sheila leaves work just after 3:30 p.m. and starts the 10-minute drive home. The girls are still at school. Howard and Chris are at work. It's unbearably hot, over 110 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. Everything is bone dry. In the valley below the Griffiths' house, something flares in the undergrowth, and it begins to smolder. Sheila is the first to get home. Up in the hills, it's normally cooler, but not today. Everyone is suffering from the heat. Sheila is unaware that in the valley below her house, the fire is now 2 minutes old and spreading fast through the dry grass. Sheila knows this is ideal wildfire weather, but she remains calm. In the 3 years she's lived here, she's never seen a wildfire in Beaconsfield.
Cold water for a hot dog.
She tries to cool off and waits for the kids to get home from school. Half an hour later, the fire is now spreading rapidly through the valley. Firefighters from the County Fire Authority, the CFA, are quickly on the scene, but already it's burning out of control. Sheila's 2 daughters arrive home from school. A neighbor has brought them down the road from the school bus. It's now 4:30 in the afternoon.
There's a bushfire!
Jane, Sheila's eldest daughter, tells her mother about the wildfire in the valley below.
Calm down. Now, who said there was a bushfire and where is it?
She's anxious and wants to leave.
So, I think we should pack up and get down the hill as soon as possible.
Sheila reassures her, telling her there is no need to panic.
Calm down.
The main fire is now 3 miles long and nearly a mile wide. It's racing south along the valley, driven by hot winds from the north. At this point, it looks as if it will bypass Upper Beaconsfield, perched on the hill above it.
Hey, Ma, Squirt. What's going on?
At 4:45, Chris arrives home from the bank.
It's miles away.
Sheila is relieved to see him. Now all her children are home safe with her.
I'm getting changed.
The 2 girls also take comfort from Chris's presence. He tries to calm them.
His dad a fireman and they're all leaving. I really think we should
Look,
go.
I'm gonna get changed.
Chris isn't worried, but Jane is adamant. Nothing will reassure her. At 5:15, Howard is on his way home from work. He sees the fire in the valley below. As the blaze sweeps through the valley, burning everything in its path, more firefighters arrive. But there is little they can do except damp down the smoldering embers it leaves in its wake. Chris, Jane, and Karen watch from the slopes above. Unlike most of their neighbors, this is the first time they've ever seen a wildfire.
Yeah, that's miles away.
It's still a long way off. They feel safe on top of the hill. But with wildfires, appearances can be deceptive. The fire is sweeping through the bone-dry bush at a rate of 7 miles per hour. It is now unstoppable. Once home, Howard immediately starts preparing for the worst. He follows the County Fire Authority's guidelines on protecting buildings in the event of bushfire.
Dad, we went down the hill a bit to have a look. It's miles away. It's still over the other side of the valley.
Oh, that's good. I'd still like to wet the house down a bit, though.
Yeah.
Chris, would you mind...
The Griffiths home isn't connected to the mains water supply, but the swimming pool provides a useful alternative.
What are you doing with all the water, Dad?
Oh, it's just a precaution. You just wet the house down a bit, that's all.
Well, can I help? Me too?
Sure.
Okay.
They wet the ground, the walls, and fences around the house. Howard and Chris clear all surrounding areas of anything that is likely to burn easily. As dusk falls, they finish taking the dry leaves and twigs from the gutters.
Watch out for spiders. It's the boys.
The first of the fire trucks roars past.
Fire must be getting close.
Chris and Howard are still confident the fire won't reach their house. Along with their neighbors, they volunteer to help with the firefighting.
You know, what's going on?
Yeah, it's a good idea. I'll go and tell your mother, all right? Keep finishing here.
It's now 7 o'clock in the evening. 3.5 hours since the blaze started. The main fire front is burning uncontrollably 3 miles away. The firefighters are attempting to prevent it from spreading up the hill towards the residential area of Upper Beaconsfield. The fire is now 8 miles long.
Right, fellas, what we're going to do, we're going to take this fire from the flank. I want you to stay close at all times.
Chris and Howard are given a quick briefing and assigned to an experienced firefighter who shows them how to use the water backpacks.
All right, let's go. Over this shoulder, got the strap on. Nozzle works in a pumping motion, just keep spraying. Try not to waste any water. You right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Let's go.
you stick with me.
They move off into the bush with the others.
Anyway, Miss Reynolds says I have to improve my spelling.
8:30 at night. Sheila and the girls eat supper on the veranda.
No?
The temperature is still in the high 90s,
Anyway, I still
and
think
the
we should
humidity
go.
remains low.
Look, Jane, I've already told you, love, we're staying here, all right? We're not going anywhere now your father and Chris are fighting the fires down there. Well, they won't know where we've gone, will they?
The girls have changed into
Anyway,
their
there's a
night
good chance
clothes.
the fires are gonna
They are
persist.
beginning to get nervous again.
Wonder who that is. No, we're fine.
Friends call Sheila and offer the family
fine.
safe beds for the night, away from the threat of the fire.
Settle you with all us lot.
But Sheila is still
Anyway,
confident
Howard
they're
and
safe.
Chris are off fighting the fires, so
Suddenly, the power fails and the phone goes dead.
Elaine, have your lights just gone off? Elaine? Elaine? Hello?
Howard, Chris, and the other volunteers work their way through the bush, fighting fires as they go.
We nearly there yet, Mum?
Yeah, we're nearly there, love, I think.
Meanwhile, Sheila suddenly decides to take some food and drink to Howard and Chris.
Just 1 minute, love. Have a look out the back, see if you can see your dad.
The girls come too.
Is Bess all right?
Now the entire Griffith family is out in the open.
Will they
Keep
both
it
be
quiet.
down here?
As Sheila drives through Upper Beaconsfield in the darkness, there is thick smoke everywhere, but no sign as yet of any flames.
See if you can see. Yeah, it's a bit of a bump. See if you can see your Auntie Pat around anywhere, eh? All right? What, love?
Sheila finds the firefighters at the point where the road enters the bush. The fire is burning fiercely, but the firefighters do not seem unduly concerned. She decides it's safer for the girls to stay in the car. She takes the food and drinks and goes to find Chris and Howard.
Now, don't get out of the car. Charlie.
She is told that Chris and Howard are safe.
Yeah, she's okay. They're all okay. The boys are okay. Looks bad, but it's not as bad as it looks.
Look, it's hot.
I gotta get back with water.
Howard and Chris are fighting the fire just 100 yards from where Sheila has parked the car. But in the flames and smoke, she can't see them. At that moment, Chris's water backpack runs dry.
Hey, let's go.
You need more water.
Okay, Chris, you follow the track straight out.
He goes back to the fire truck for a refill.
Follow the track straight out now, okay? Go.
Okay, thanks, fellas.
Just then, the winds change direction, turning the flames a full 90 degrees. It's the moment every firefighter dreads.
It's pretty dangerous here. Thank you, dear. Bye.
Thanks, love.
Sheila is relieved to see Chris walk unharmed out of the fire.
Love, you're looking a state, love.
The Griffiths are unaware that 50 miles per hour winds are now blowing the fire up the hill, straight towards them. Suddenly, the bush explodes around them.
Get in the car, get in the car! Get in the car!
Chris pushes Sheila into the car and drives. The girls are screaming for their father. He's still out there. Two firefighters jump in the car and scream at Chris to keep driving.
Come on, let's go, let's go.
Just calm down, all right?
Come on.
Just calm down.
When they get to the fire truck, Chris stops the car to let the two firefighters out. Sheila wants to go back and get Howard, but the firefighters tell Chris to keep driving. They know the wind has changed direction and that the fire is heading straight for Upper Beaconsfield.
The others, the fire's coming up the hill. You've got to get out. Go now, go!
It's all right. It's okay, it's okay, it's all right.
The Griffiths continue to drive up the hill. They're hoping to reach the summit and then drive down into the next valley where they will be safe. Behind them, somewhere in the flames, is Howard, but they cannot turn back. As they near the top of the hill, they turn and head straight into a raging inferno. The fire has raced ahead of the Griffiths car. Directly in front of them is a wall of flame. Turning back is not an option, as it will only lead back into the blaze. They're trapped. Chris drives straight through the fire. The Griffiths are now surrounded by flames on all sides.
Don't panic. It's all right, girls. Just keep calm. Don't panic, all right?
Chris has driven this road 1,000 times, but it's now unrecognizable. Everything is on fire. The smoke is dense. The heat in the car is overpowering. Suddenly, in the middle of the flames, Chris stops the car. Chris gets out of the car and disappears into a wall of flames. Nobody knows why. Sheila and the two girls are frantic. If they stay where they are, they will be burned alive. Sheila drives on blindly through the flames and the intense heat. She manages to drive on for another few hundred yards. The road is lined with burning trees. Their blazing canopies arc over the Griffiths car, creating a tunnel of fire. The car engine starts to stall and shudders to a halt. Sheila is convinced they are going to die. Sheila can smell gasoline. She'd filled the tank that day. She's convinced the car is about to blow up.
Get out! 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 The car's full of petrol! Get out! For Christ's sake! Get out of the car!
run through the tunnel of fire. Red-hot embers rain down on them, burning their flesh as they go. The girls are faster than Sheila and are far ahead. They call out to her to hurry. Sheila is moving as fast as she can, but she can't keep up. Encouraged by their cries, she keeps running. Meanwhile, Howard is still at the main fire front. As the wind changes, with only seconds to spare, 2 firefighters throw him to the ground and shield him from the intense heat. The fire sweeps through the trees above them, just high enough to spare their lives. Unaware of what has happened to his family, Howard emerges from what's left of the bush. As the fire sweeps through houses in Upper Beaconsfield, gas cylinders and car tires start exploding. Howard sees Sheila's car in flames. There is no sign of her or Chris or the girls. Worried and exhausted, he starts walking towards his house. It is now 4 o'clock in the morning.
Chris? Sheila? Sheila? Chris?
Miraculously, the house is still there. But there is no sign of his family. Meanwhile, Pa Moore, one of the Griffiths neighbors, is about to abandon his house to the fire when 3 blackened figures come screaming from the flames. Karen is the first to reach him. She bangs on the windows until Pa stops and lets them in.
Get in, quick! Get in! Get in! Pa, drive! Just go!
Pa drives Sheila and the 2 girls out of the flames. Ma's old car isn't traveling fast enough for the girls. They're convinced the flames will catch them.
Get out!
Sheila is in agony from the burns she suffered.
Look at me, open your eyes, Mom!
She has the worst injuries of the three, with third-degree burns over 30% of her body. Sheila loses consciousness. The girls are convinced she's going to die. The dry winds stop. The fire finally burns itself out, but embers continue to smolder for 10 days. The cost in lives and property is enormous. 23,000 acres have been burned. Over 2,000 homes have been destroyed in the fires that raged in the state of Victoria. 47 people have lost their lives.
I got down to this place called Akuna Park, and there was just literally hundreds of ambulances. There was an officer. He said, "What's your problem, mate?" And I said, "Have you heard anything about a Griffiths family?" And he says, "Oh, yes." He says, "Your wife and 2 daughters have been taken into a hospital that in the city, in the Alfred Hospital." He says, "But I've got some bad news." He says, "You've lost your son."
I didn't think at all that anything would have happened to Christopher. In fact, in a funny sort of way, I was a little bit angry with him that he'd got out of the car and sort of left us. And I didn't think for 1 minute that anything would have happened to him, because he was younger and fit, and I thought, well, he'd just make for the nearest house.
No one knows why Chris left the car. He may have wanted to get help, or he may just have panicked. Once outside the car, he was exposed to the full heat of the flames.
The police said, "Well, you've got to come back to the morgue and identify your son." Christopher was laid out on a table with a sheet over him, and I said, "Well, do I have to look at him?" And they said, "Well, yes." And I said, "Well, one thing I can recognise Christopher by," I said, "he'd got these boots on, and on each boot they'd got braided onto each ankle was a deer's head." And they said, "Well, that'll be fine. You can identify him like that if you wish." And I said, "Okay." And I looked and I said, "Yes, that's Christopher." And as I say, he'd got this sheet over him, and that's how I saw him and how I wanted to remember him. But I remember giving him a hug, and I could feel his hair, just like Sheila's, all burnt up and matted.
It is the immense heat radiating from the flames, rather than direct contact with the blaze itself, which causes most wildfire fatalities.
There's a number of ways that people can actually perish within a fire. These flames are radiating, it's very hot. The body undertakes enormous shock, and it just can't cope, and death occurs within a few seconds. The second way in which I believe people can die is if people breathe in and ingest hot air, and this is perhaps a little gruesome, but what then happens is that you get severe burning of the inside of the lungs. A fluid is generated, and you just can't breathe.
Though Sheila, Jane and Karen never came in direct contact with the flames, the heat alone was enough to give them severe burns.
The girls had got short summer pyjamas on, and they'd put on dressing gowns, a polyester material over the top. Well, as we started running, Karen threw hers off, but Jane didn't. and the sleeves melted down on her hands, and it melted onto her legs as well. When we arrived in casualty, the last thing I can remember, they were shaking me to name a next of kin. They told me afterwards, at my age, with my extent of burns, that years ago I wouldn't have survived.
It would be a long struggle for Sheila and her daughters. The most immediate danger was the massive fluid loss caused by the burns.
When the skin is burned, the associated blood vessels there get damaged and they start leaking fluid. The victim very quickly ceases to look like what he or she was before the accident, because very quickly their face swells up like a balloon. Before the days when we could give good intravenous therapy, people died of fluid loss. They just became dehydrated.
This fluid loss has to be counteracted immediately. If the patient is unable to drink, then liquids must be administered intravenously. Burns victims can lose up to half their body fluid in a single day.
When I was conscious on the following morning, the first thing that hit me was that I couldn't move. With the trouble with burns, you get an awful lot of liquid that comes from your burns, and they'd put dressings on us, but it was the regular thing that during the day these dressings were soaking wet with all the seepage, and they kept reinforcing them and putting more dressings on and more dressings, so that if you can imagine a soaking wet dressings on your limbs, the weight, you just couldn't move.
More.
Having survived massive fluid loss, they now faced a second threat to their lives.
The cells are now dead, but there's a rich source of energy for bacteria, so the bacteria can now live on the cells without the body's defense mechanisms coming into play, because there's no defense. And then they get to the stage when there's overwhelming infection within the burn, and then it spills over into the body and causes blood poisoning, septicemia.
Jane did develop an infection and spent days in an isolation ward. She and her mother and sister had to undergo excruciatingly painful treatment, which many victims find even more painful than their original injuries. The only way to avoid infection is to remove the dead skin and to replace it with a graft from another part of the body.
Skin graft donor sites are terribly painful because you've shaved off from normal skin the surface and exposed this myriad of nerve endings. And similarly, if you take away dead tissue, you're exposing living tissue, and the living tissue underneath, of course, is painful. So that's why people with extensive burns, they look back on it, having survived, on a period of horrendous pain.
When Jane had hers done, I mean, I could hear her screaming through two closed doors, you know, and she was very crafty, because if we both had to have something done, she made sure I had mine done first to see, you know, what it involved and how bad it was.
After 7 weeks, the Griffiths were released from the hospital. However, their ordeal wasn't over. They would return many times for further treatment. As with many burns victims, it was the psychological scars which would take the longest to heal.
I suffer from anxiety and panic disorder now. I've lost 50 kilos in weight. I used to be 90 kilos. I've lost a lot of weight through stress. I've seen numerous psychiatrists. The fact that I never got to say goodbye to my brother, you know, that still plays on me, and so I'm still having a lot of therapy for that.
We've all had our individual problems. I've had my own share of problems as well, both physically and mentally, which I guess is just a natural thing after such a traumatic experience.
I don't want to be too much of a soothsayer, but I would think they'll carry this problem to their death.
The events of a single day in April 1983 changed the lives of the Griffith family forever. Scientists now believe it is possible to prevent such a catastrophe from happening again. All it takes is a single spark. The spark can come from a barbecue, a bolt of lightning, or an exhaust pipe. The fire will spread rapidly. If it burns for more than 5 minutes, it will almost certainly be impossible to extinguish. Wildfires have blazed throughout the centuries, but now scientists are beginning to understand how they work and how they can be contained.
When you think of a forest fire, I suspect some people think of a whole area of forest all burning at once. That really isn't what happens. What happens is that there is a wall of fire. The flames that travel as a wall are likely to be travelling at quite a fair speed, so the time that they're in any one spot is really quite low, a minute or so.
This wall of fire is called the fire front. It spreads rapidly, burning dry matter on the ground.
The fuel that is of importance for those flames are the fine fuels, leaves, twigs, dry grass. They're not the trees, they're not the trunks, they're not the big branches.
After the fire front has moved on, the burning embers it leaves in its wake start to incinerate larger static objects, such as trees.
From that point on, the heat from the fire is enough to start, in this type of country, running up the soft bark on the outside of the trees, and it now starts to climb right into the trees, and you can first start to see a bit of smoke through the tree canopy.
Once the fire reaches the leaves on the top of a tree, a process known as crowning begins. The fire front now moves through the tree canopy as well as on the ground beneath, creating a gigantic wall of fire. Burning embers are blown over large distances, starting new fires ahead of the main fire front. These are called spot fires, and often develop into new fire fronts, rapidly increasing the spread of flames and sometimes trapping firefighters. On Ash Wednesday, the spot fires caused havoc in towns throughout southeast Australia.
The hardware store started to burn. The gas cylinders, 100-pound gas cylinders, were exploding like bombs, and tins of paint were jumping up in the air and going bang.
But it was the sudden change in wind direction which did the real damage on Ash Wednesday. The fire front had burned its way through the undergrowth, leaving a trail of smoldering ash several miles long in its wake. When the wind direction changed, the ember trail reignited, and because the wind was now coming from a different direction, the flames were blown sideways into fresh undergrowth, creating a new fire front stretching the length of the ember trail. This new fire front was much longer and more difficult to contain than the original one.
Along comes a wind change at 90 degrees, so instead of having a thin, narrow front, it now has a 12-kilometre wide front. Most of the deaths that occur in southeast Australia occur on the passage of this wind change.
The wind changes on Ash Wednesday were dramatic and lasted longer and blew at greater speeds than anyone could have foreseen.
I don't think any of us were prepared for the severity of the wind change. I would say that the winds were almost cyclonic by the effects on the buildings, and a lot of buildings were destroyed by the actual wind change.
50 miles per hour winds blew the fire towards Upper Beaconsfield. The situation worsened as the fire started moving uphill.
A fire burning in flat country will burn at a certain speed. If that fire comes to a slope, for every 10 degrees of slope, the rate of spread will double. So fires travel faster uphill. Now, around here, there's slopes of 20 degrees, so you've got 4 times the rate of spread as it goes up those slopes.
Those caught in its path were amazed at the fire's speed.
Just down the road from here, one of the lieutenants in the local brigade was on the roof of his house trying to put out the embers, and he believes this whole 380 acres in this park burned in between 3 to 5 seconds. He reckons he saw that from the roof of his house.
Within a matter of minutes, the fire reached Upper Beaconsfield.
A lot of people try to think of firefighting as warfare, and it's not, because in most wars, either side have a possibility of winning. Not with the fire. The fire is just so much exceeds our capacity to cope with it that it will always win.
As the wind changed, people heard a loud roar and saw a massive fireball.
When it came back up, it hit the bush and it was like an atomic bomb going off. The whole of the bush exploded up in the air, and the firefighters that were standing there, they just were shouting, "Get out as quick as you can."
The fire moved so quickly there was no time to seek sanctuary. Many were caught out in the open.
The most dangerous thing that people can do is be out in the open, on foot or in motor vehicles during the passage of the fire front, as they simply don't get enough protection from the radiant heat. Ideally, to maximise your chances, you'd be sheltering down below the level of the glass in the doors, maybe under a woolen blanket or under extra clothing, anything that will block the radiant heat.
Many tried to outdrive wildfires, but burning trees, poor visibility, and traffic jams caused by other drivers trying to escape all increase the chance of fatalities. Drivers are frequently trapped inside their cars while attempting to flee.
It then becomes a matter of good luck, if you like, as to whether you survive. And we have stories from Ash Wednesday about people sitting in their cars until the upholstery ignites and then being forced to run. And some of the people who run survive, and some of the people who ran didn't.
It is best to stay in a building. Even a wooden house provides better protection than a car. A fire front may only take a minute to pass over a building, during which time its walls offer protection from the heat. As long as the area around the house has been cleared of leaves and undergrowth, the flames shouldn't reach the house itself.
Whilst you might have a very severe and intense fire in the forest, the actual fire spreading across your property is much lower flames, much less heat, and it becomes a survivable experience.
Hey, here, right!
The main danger is from embers and burning debris blown onto a house. These embers need to be found and extinguished immediately.
One classic example from Upper Beaconsfield involved a burning ember landing in the corner of a wooden window frame, and over a period of hours it bore its way right through the wooden window frame, ignited the lace curtain in behind, and the owner of the house happened to be walking past with a big jug of water, threw it on the curtain and saved their house. In the house opposite them in the street, 2 members of the family died trying to conduct a late evacuation.
Ash Wednesday 1983 was one of the worst wildfires this century. It changed much of the accepted thinking on how we deal with them. Wildfires are now seen as an inevitable part of the natural order. The fuel that builds up on the bush floor must burn, either by chance or by design. Fire is such an integral part of the ecology of the world's arid regions that many plant species rely on fire to germinate. The Australian Aborigines knew that fire was essential for survival. They used fire to hunt and create paths through the bush. Their constant burning kept natural fuels at a low level.
The whole thing over tens of thousands of years came to a very nice situation where probably the fuels were quite low, the fire intensities were quite low, and the fire frequency was quite high.
The arrival of European settlers in the 1700s destroyed this delicate balance between man and nature.
Fire was used largely to clear the forest for agricultural purposes, but once that had been done, fire became the enemy rather than a part of the lifestyle.
In many dry regions, controlled fires are now regularly used to reduce the risk of a major catastrophe.
If we do nothing, what we actually do get is a fire about every 30 years or so. And of course, because your fuels are at a very high level, that 30-year fire is a very intense fire.
Ash Wednesday was just such a fire. It changed the Griffiths forever.
We tried to get our lives back together. We lived back in Upper Beaconsfield for 18 months, but it was an absolute nightmare. Every time a fire siren went, they'd all panic. And so in the end, we moved out of that area. We stayed there for 2 years and then moved down the hill to Berwick, where it was a small township which was safe.
Where we live in, it's not bush and it's safe. We've still got relations that live at Upper Beak and we do go up there, but I don't really like it.
The Griffiths have now moved house again, but the emotional scars remain.
It doesn't end. It goes on, and like every summer I'm living it. Every day I'm looking in the mirror with my scars. I have scars all up my legs. I never thought I'd have a child. I now have a beautiful 6.5-year-old son and a man who doesn't see me for my scars. He sees me for what's inside.
Of the 47 people who died on Ash Wednesday, 21 were from Upper Beaconsfield.
If you're going to live in such thick bush, I think you really need to be cautious and be aware that that a fire is ready to happen at any stage. You know, give a hot day and strong winds, that's all it really needs.
In Upper Beaconsfield, there is now a memorial park dedicated to those who lost their lives on Ash Wednesday. It remains a chilling reminder of wildfire's lethal power.